Can I start, ma'am? Okay. Uh, that's a cue. I guess I can start. So, welcome to all my dear participants to this fifth day of the certificate course on exploring mythological paradigms, and we are talking about Greek mythology and its relevance in contemporary literature. And today we'll be dealing with the most important aspect of any society, any discussion, or any culture, which is the female. And our focus here will be the divine feminine. And this divine feminine, not it will not only encompass goddesses, but it will also encompass, it will also cover the exceptional women in Greek mythology and culture coming from classical age. So basically, today we'll examine that how ancient Greek culture has conceptualized female power, wisdom, and influence through their pantheon of goddesses and mythological women. So these figures, which we'll be analyzing today, they were not only merely decorative additions to the male-dominated narratives. They represented fundamental forces of nature, civilization, and human experience. So, if we talk about this concept of divine feminine, so in Greek mythology, this concept encompass multiple dimensions like goddesses as cosmic force, as protectors of specific domains, as moral arbiters, and also as complex psychological archetypes. Now, all these functions, all these representations have continued to resonate in modern culture, and we'll explore how these figures both reflect and shape ancient Greek attitudes towards femininity, towards power, and towards the sacred. So, in the very first slide, you can see that I have started with the beginning, which is the primordial feminine, the earth, chaos, and creation. So, in the very first lecture, I've discussed about Gaia. So Gaia is interpreted as the original mother. So our journey in Greek mythology, it begins with Gaia. She is the primordial earth goddess who emerged from chaos. So this is very interesting that the very first creation that emerged from chaos was not a man but a woman, and she has established the foundation of entire lives and civilization. And Gaia represents, in this sense, Gaia represents the foundational feminine principle. And she is literally the ground of being, because Gaia is earth, so she represents the ground of being, a source from which all life springs. So, unlike later goddesses who rule specific domains, the very interesting aspect about Gaia is that she is the domain herself. So she does not rule any one domain, but she is the domain in just a second. She is the domain herself. So in Hesiod's Theogony, Gaia, she spontaneously generates Uranus and the sky, and she demonstrates the divine feminine capacity for parthenogenetic creation. Now, another very important aspect of Gaia is that she is the first creature to be created, and then she is independent of any kind of production, because she has created further creation, she has created further elements without any male support. So she has initiated this parthenogenetic creation, which is creation without male intervention. She has created Uranus and so on. So she is this female entity is independent of any male support and dependence. So this establishes a very crucial theme, because it represents feminine creative power as autonomous and self-sufficient. So when Uranus imprisons their children, the children of Uranus and Gaia, within Gaia's body, then she also orchestrates his castration through their son Kronos. So she reveals another essential aspect of divine feminine power, which is the protective mother who acts decisively when her children are threatened. So Gaia's prophetic abilities foreshadow the oracular traditions associated with female deities throughout Greek religion. So she's not only the first creature, she's not only the entire domain in herself, she's not only independent of male production, but she also represents the oracular tradition, the very first oracular tradition in Greek mythology. So, the very famous oracle at Delphi, before it was being claimed by Apollo, it belonged to Gaia. So this transition, this shifting of transition, the control of future, this transition symbolized the historical shift from earth centered feminine religious practices to more organized masculine Olympian system. So these are the important characteristics of Gaia, and very interestingly, the Greek mythology begins not with a man but with a woman, and this woman has ultimate power, and later in the gradual discourses the power shifts to more male dominated elements and to the more male dominated interpretations. And next we have the important female divinity from chaos is Nyx, and Nyx is the primordial goddess of night, and she represents another facet of primordial feminine power. And even Zeus fears her, as Homer tells us in Iliad that she was feared by everyone, and she used to dwell in underworld. She's surrounded by her children, sleep, death, dreams, and fates. And this next very, you must say, importantly, she manifests the mysterious, unknowable aspects of existence that even the king of gods cannot fully control or comprehend. So this is an important, you may say, distinction between Gaia and Nyx. That Gaia, she establishes creation, and Nyx, somewhere or the other, she manifests this power of destruction, the darkness within her. And this reverence for Nyx, it also reflects ancient recognition that some feminine powers operate beyond the reach of patriarchal authority. So Nyx basically represents the unconscious, the liminal space between the day and night, life and death, known and unknown. So, very interestingly, in Greek mythology, you have two very ultimate forms of female power, and the civilization begins with this power. So, one is the power of creation, then is the power of destruction, one is the power of light. Next is the power of darkness. So there's a very, you may say, significant parallelism when we talk about Gaia and Nyx, and it represents that female can be both caregiving and they can be more destructive if they are challenged to a limit. So, this is an important aspect of pre-model creation. Ma'am, can you please change to the next slide? Yes. So from the primordial goddesses and primordial women, we move to the second generation of second cycle rather of Greek mythology, which is the Olympian goddesses. And these Olympian goddesses, like if Gaia and Nyx, they represent the power of creation and destruction, then these Olympian goddesses, they represent very earthly element, very worldly materialistic element, which is sovereignty and power, the specialized power. So we have first the Hera. She is better described as the complex queen because Hera, she is Zeus's wife and queen of the gods. She embodies the contradictions inherent in feminine power within the patriarchal structure. So, as the goddess of marriage and legitimate birth, she basically represents the sanctity of matrimonial bonds and social order. However, her myths primarily portray her as jealous, as vengeful, pursuing Zeus's lovers and their children with a relentless fury. But this characterization, it reveals deep cultural anxieties. About feminine power within marriage. So, Hera's jealousy can be interpreted as righteous anger at violation of sacred vows and legitimate authority within marriage. So, her persecution of figures like Heracles and Dionysius isn't merely out of personal spite, but it is the enforcement of legitimacy and proper order against Zeus's chaotic philandering. And then we have very interesting symbol of Hera, which is peacock. So it symbolizes her connection to vision and watchfulness. So the 100 eyes of Argus transferred to her sacred peacock. It represents her role as a goddess who sees all. Particularly the transgression against matrimonial law. Her pomegranate symbolizes fertility within legitimate union, contrasting with the wild, uncontrolled fertility of Zeus. She represents more balanced, more truthful, more honest, and you may say more fidel form of marriage. So Hera, she is mostly presented as vengeful goddess, but if you look at her persona and representation, then she is used to highlight and re-establish the sanctity of you may say marriage and marital bonds, and she is used to criticize the wild sexual nature outside marriage of extramarital affairs. Then we have Athena. She is the wisdom and strategy. She is the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. So, I'm sorry. Athena presents a very fascinating paradox. Like she is a warrior goddess who has emerged fully armed from Zeus's head, and in a way, she has bypassed traditional feminine roles of pregnancy and childbirth. So she is a woman, she is born out of a man, and she has born out of a man but fully armored. So she is, in a way, challenging the physical dominancy and superiority of a man. Though born out of a man, but she is equally powerful, she is equally strategic, and she is celebrated as the goddess of war. So she has somewhere you may say, dismantled the feminine roles of pregnancy and childbirth. She embodies intellectual rather than biological creativity, and she represents the mind's capacity to generate new ideas, strategies, and solutions. And as goddess of crafts and useful arts, Athena bridges the gap between theoretical wisdom and practical application. Her invention of the olive tree demonstrates how divine feminine wisdom manifests gifts that sustain civilization. Because this olive provides food, oil for light, it provides woods, and its branches have become the symbol of peace. So it shows that how feminine wisdom creates lasting value rather than merely demonstrating power. And even most importantly, Athena's role in the Trojan War, it reveals her as the patron of strategies and strategic warfare rather than a very, you may say, lopsided masculine warfare. So she aids heroes like Odysseus who rely on intelligence and cunning rather than brute force. Her protection of cities, particularly Athens, establishes the connection between feminine wisdom and civic order. And this idea of feminine wisdom and civic order, this idea that communities thrive under the guidance of a strategic influence and intelligence rather than arbitrary rule. So her combination of femininity with civic order, the wisdom with order, it establishes a unique ability of female creation, of the unique ability of feminine power that values strategic establishment more than the arbitrary patriarchal or hierarchical rule. And very importantly, she is a virgin goddess, so her perpetual virginity, it is not understood as something anti-feminine, but her virginity represents complete autonomy, that she belongs entirely to herself and her chosen purposes. So she is uncommitted to the biological and social obligations that marriage typically entail for women in any civilization, and obviously Greek civilization. So she retains her identity as a woman, as strategic, as a autonomous, complete woman, rather than being associated with any man. And then we have Artemis. Artemis is can be described as wild nature, and she represents feminine autonomy. So Artemis represents, you may say, the untamed power of feminine dimension. Then she is the goddess of hunt, wild animals, and childbirth. Sorry. her domain encompasses everything beyond the boundaries of civilization. So anything which is not accepted within culture, within civilization, becomes the boundary or becomes the domain of Artemis. And yet, she also presides over the most fundamentally feminine biological experience, which is bringing life into the world. So, the duality of Artemis as both hunter and protector of the young animals, it reflects the complex nature of the feminine relationship with life and death, because female gives life, and they, as a human, they are also prone to death. So they have a very interesting, you may say, relation with life and death. And Artemis, she encompasses or manifests this relation. Now, Artemis basically, she is in a habit of killing what she loves, and she also protects what she might destroy. So this embodies the natural cycles of life that operate beyond human moral categories. So Artemis very beautifully, she establishes female as both the creator and destructor, something which is, you may say, this has this aspect of femininity has passed down from Gaia as Nyx. Like Gaia and Nyx, they represent the female power of creation and destruction. And Artemis has evolved and manifested this power into one, that she is the protector of wild, she is also the killer of wild, she is the protector of young wild animals, and she is also the killer of young wild animal, because she is the goddess of hunting. So she has very uniquely, you may say, manifested a very special dimension of feminine power, which is the giving of life, but also the reason for death. And she also has her band of virgin huntresses, which creates an alternative social structure. So, where female are mostly and largely associated with caregiving, she has her own band of huntresses, something very different and unique to. The gendered dimension of female, that she has this alternative female band, kind of alternative social structure for women, where a feminine community, it exists outside patriarchal marriage arrangement, and these women choose loyalty to the goddess over submission to husbands. So it represents the possibility of feminine life, organized around different principles than those dominating mainstream Greek patriarchal structure. And then we have myth of Actaeon, with reference to Artemis, and which transformed into stag. Actaeon transformed into stag for seeing Artemis naked. So it establishes clear boundaries around feminine autonomy, because Artemis punishes Actaeon. So this punishment isn't merely about modesty, it is about the violation of sacred feminine space and the consequences of masculine intrusion into realms that exclusively belong to women. So Artemis has a very, you may say, unique symbolism in Greek mythology. And then obviously we have the most famous Aphrodite. She represents, though she is known as the goddess of sexuality, but she represents a sacred form of sexuality and the creative power. So Aphrodite governs the sexual love, beauty, and procreation, and these are the aspects of human experience that ancient Greeks recognized as both, as more divine rather than biological. So her birth from sea foam, generated by Uranus's severe genitals, connects her to primordial creative forces, while establishing sexuality as sacred, rather than profane. So, this is a very important aspect in Greek mythology. That's the act of procreation, the sexuality. It is not considered as taboo. It is not considered as profane, but it is more treated in a more sacred manner. So we have, Aphrodite divided into two, you may say, parameters. So first is the distinction between Aphrodite Urania. So Aphrodite Urania, it represents heavenly love, and then we have Aphrodite Pandemos. So Pandemos represents the common love. So it reveals sophisticated Greek understanding of sexuality's multiple dimensions. So this sacred sexuality of Aphrodite, it involves the recognition of divine presence within physical attraction and romantic love, and which could have everlasting experiences beyond, you may say, biological drives. And Aphrodite's power over gods and mortals alike, it demonstrates that sexual attraction operates as a kind of cosmic force beyond rational control or moral judgment. So even Zeus falls under her influence, showing that erotic power represents one of the fundamental organizing principles of existence. And also her role in the Trojan War, supporting Paris and the Trojans, links her to the devastating consequences of uncontrolled desire. Yet the war also demonstrates beauty's power to reshape history and topple kingdoms. It reveals both the creative and destructive potential of the forces she represents. So Aphrodite represents a sacred sexuality, but if this sexuality is turned into something profane, it will ultimately bring destruction, which is very beautifully manifested in the Trojan War, because the very base of Trojan War was the beauty contest between these three goddesses, and what follows was the entire destruction of a civilization. So this is a unique aspect of Aphrodite and her symbolism, that sexuality, if it should be respected within the, you may say, biological boundaries and constraint, and it should not be reduced to something profane. And then lastly, we have Demeter, which is who is the goddess of maternal power and agriculture civilization. So Demeter's mythology, it centers on the abduction of her daughter Persephone by Hades, and her response reveals the awesome power of maternal love. So when Zeus permits Hades to take Persephone without consulting Demeter, she withdraws her gifts from the earth, causing universal famine that threatens to destroy both mortals and gods. So this myth, it establishes several crucial principles, like maternal authority over children cannot be overridden by masculine political arrangements, and feminine power, when withdrawn, reveals itself as essential to exist in itself, and the relationship between mothers and daughters operates according to different rules rather than those governing masculine hierarchies. So the final resolution to Demeter's crisis, when her daughter was abducted, that Persephone's division of time between the underworld and the upper world creates seasons and establishes Eleusinian mysteries, the most important religious cult in ancient Greek. So these mysteries, they promised initials knowledge of death and birth, suggesting that the deepest spiritual truths were understood to emerge from feminine wisdom about life cycles. So Demeter's grief and rage transform the natural world, demonstrating that how divine feminine emotions operates as cosmic forces. So Demeter's mourning, it literally changed the reality, and it even forced Zeus to acknowledge that some relations transcends political authority. Can you please change the slide? Yes. Now from the primordial goddesses to the very direct, you may say, goddesses, we have some specialized divine form of femininity in the Greek mythology, who are usually covered and who are largely referred to, but their symbolism is poorly studied. So the very first is obviously the muses. Muses, as we all know, the nine muses represent the divine feminine as the source of artistic and intellectual inspiration. So they are the daughter of Zeus and Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne is understood as memory, and this links creative expression to both divine authority and the you may say preservation of cultural knowledge. So each muse governs a specific art. Like Calliope, she governs epic poetry. We have Clio for history, Erato for love, Euterpe for music, and Melpomene for tragedy, Polyhymnia for sacred poetry, and so on and so forth. So this is specialization. It reveals Greek understanding that different form of creative expressions require different types of divine inspiration, which are mostly feminine in nature. And then we have Muses' residence on Mount Helicon, and their association with the springs connects, you may say, artistic inspiration to sacred landscape and flowing water, symbols of life giving and feminine power. So we have poets who invoke muse not as decorative convention, but as acknowledgement that genuine creativity requires divine assistance, and this assistance specifically is feminine in nature. So this is a very, you may say, again, interesting aspect of Greek mythology, that it associates femininity, the female gender, with creativity, with intellectuality, which obviously with the evolving civilization, the discourses have changed. But if we look at the classical orders and the classical interpretation of divine power, so the females have more, you may say, dimensions as compared to the male gods and male figures in the Greek mythology. Then obviously we have fates represent the cosmic order and destiny. So there are basically three, you may say, forms of fates. First is Clotho. Clotho is the spinner, which is the reversal of your fortune. Then we have Lachesis. Lachesis is the allotter, like you are allotted certain divine predestination or will. And then you have Atropos. Atropos is basically the inevitable. So all these three together, they represents divine feminine authority over destiny itself. So they spin the fates, they spin, they measure, they cut the thread of each life, operating according to the cosmic law that which even Zeus cannot override. So their depiction, the fates are usually depicted as old women. So their depiction as old women, it emphasizes that ultimate power, it belongs not to youth and beauty, but to wisdom accumulated through years of experiences. So the fates embody the principle that existence operates according to patterns and limits that transcends personal desire or individual will. So their spinning, measuring, and cutting connect them to traditional feminine activities, which is the textile work. But it also elevates these activities to cosmic significance. So the metaphor of their spinning, of their measuring, of their cutting, it suggests that reality itself is woven, and that existence has pattern and structure, and that this structure is maintained through feminine wisdom. And then we have Hecate, and Hecate is known as the goddess of liminal power and hidden knowledge. So Hecate basically, sorry, she governs crossroads. She governs magic, necromancy, and liminal spaces, the space between life and death. So these boundaries between different states of being, she operates at night, accompanied by ghost dogs carrying torches that illuminate hidden truths. So her triple form represents her ability to see past, present, and future simultaneously, as well as her governance over the three realms like earth, sky, and sea. It establishes female gender in as the ultimate controller of the different realms of universe. So this comprehensive vision which Hecate has of past, present, and future, it establishes her as a goddess of ultimate knowledge, particularly that knowledge that remains hidden from ordinary perception. So we have Hecate's association with magic and witchcraft, which sorry, which reflects the connection between feminine power and practices that operate outside official religious structure. So she represents the aspects of divine feminine that, you may say, resist institutionalization and continue to function according to more older and more primal principles and forces. Ma'am, can you please change the slide? Yes. So now moving from the divine to the mortal woman who are considered as divine archetypes. So we have Pandora. She is the she represents the complexity of you may say feminine nature. So sorry, the myth of Pandora, the first woman. She's the first woman. It reveals profound Greek anxieties about feminine nature. So she is obviously created by gods as punishment for Prometheus's theft of fire. Pandora establishes the idea that women represents both blessing and curse, gift and punishment. So we have her very famous Pandora's box, which was not actually a box; it was a jar, but it contains all evils that plague humanity, but also hope, which remains inside when she closes the lid. So her box released all kinds of evil, but she closes the lid when hope was about to come out of the jar or the box, as it is famously called. So she saves hope. So that this detail suggests that feminine nature encompasses both a destructive and redemptive potential, that the same source that releases suffering also retains the possibility of healing. So Pandora's creation by multiple gods like Hephaestus has shaped her body, Aphrodite has granted her beauty, Athena taught her crafts, Hermes gave her cunning strategies. It suggests that complete femininity requires diverse divine contribution. So, in a way, she represents the totality of feminine potential, which is both positive and negative. Then we have Helen. She is the representative of beauty as cosmic force. So, this Helen of Troy, she embodies beauty which is so transcendent that it operates as a force of nature, which is beyond moral judgment or personal control. So her face is famously has said to have launched a thousands of ships, because beauty of this magnitude, it compels action, it reshapes politics, and it alters history. So the question of Helen's agency, whether she goes willingly with Paris or she is abducted, it reflects Greek ambivalence about feminine desire and responsibility. So we have different versions of our story explore whether transcendent beauty bears moral responsibility for its effects or it operates beyond such considerations. But Helen's ultimate fate varies according to different sources. So some place her in Elysian fields or other describe her death or transformation. So these varying endings, it suggests that figures who embody cosmic forces cannot be contained within ordinary narrative structures or moral framework. So, if we compare and contrast Aphrodite and Helen, then Helen could be considered as an extension of Aphrodite's principle, because Aphrodite represents sacred sexuality and Helen represents that desire of sexuality, of beauty. When it transcends moral boundaries and obligation, it will ultimately leads to destruction. So Helen's beauty is not something ordinary, it is the cosmic balance which should be maintained by humans. So if you do not maintain this balance, if you do not maintain this balance toward beauty, towards sexuality, towards your own physical desires, it will lead to destruction. It will have consequences. And then we have very important media. She is the dangerous outsider. The media represents the foreign sorcerers whose magical powers both aid and threaten Greek civilization. So her assistance to Jason in obtaining golden fleece demonstrate beneficial feminine magic, but her revenge when Jason abandons her, it also reveals the destructive potential of the same power. So her infanticide, like killing her own children to punish Jason, it violates the most fundamental expectations of maternal behavior. Yet, this myth presents her motivation as comprehensible, even justified, like within the logic of honor and revenge that governs Greek heroic culture. So, media escape in the chariot of Helios after her crimes establishes her as more than human. So, see, she transcends ordinary justice because she operates according to different laws than those governing mortals women. So her divine grandfather Helios recognizes her right to revenge, and even when it violates human moral standards. So media presents a very interesting and classic example of female justice, that female justice could be detrimental and unexpected. It could be shocking in nature. Ma'am, can you please change the slide? Yes, so we have the psychological and cultural significance of all these fascinating women we have studied. So, very first is the archetypal functions. So, these goddesses and mythological women, they function as psychological archetypes that has mapped, you may say, the full spectrum of feminine experience and potential. So they have provide models for understanding different aspects of psyche, like Athena represents rational wisdom, Aphrodite as erotic power, which has to be sacred, Artemis represents the independent spirit, Demeter as nurturing mother, then Hera as committed partner, and so forth. So Carl Jung's concept of the enema, it derives heavily on these Greek representations of divine feminine, suggesting that they represent not merely cultural constructs, but you may say a fundamental psychological patterns that transcends specific historical and cultural boundaries. And then we have the complexity and power attributed to these figures, which reveal that Greek culture, despite its patriarchal social structure, it recognized, very interestingly and very importantly, it recognized female power as essential, multifaceted, and sometimes dangerous. So these myths, they don't simply subordinate like feminine power to masculine authority. They explore the tensions, the negotiations, and the mutual dependencies between different types of power, not categorically as male and female, but as human overall. So the prevalence of transformation stories like women changed into trees, animals, or geographical feature suggest that feminine power was understood as fundamentally connected to natural processes and cosmic forces rather than limited to social or political roles. So, with this, I'll just end my lecture, and very briefly, I'll just try to cover up the importance of these divine femininity. So, in this divine feminine in Greek mythology, it has still, you may say, very manifestly continued to influence the contemporary culture, literature, psychology, because these Greek archetypes have provided, you may say, a vocabulary kind of thing for understanding feminine experience that encompasses power, wisdom, creativity, and transformation. So, modern feminist scholarship has reclaimed many of these figures, reading past patriarchal, you may say, interpretations to discover the autonomous power and complex wisdom these female characters represent. So, contemporary goddesses' spirituality, it draws directly on Greek sources, adapting ancient insights for modern spiritual practice. So, the divine feminine in Greek mythology, it ultimately reveals that the sacred encompasses the full spectrum of feminine experience. So these females have, from creation to destruction, from wisdom to wildness, from nurturing care to fierce independence. These ancient stories, they still offer guidance for understanding complexity and power of feminine nature in all its manifestations. With this, I end my lecture. If you have any question, you may please ask.
Participants, anybody have a question? You can unmute yourself and ask to ma'am, or you can write down in chat box. You so please.